Well, hello, this is Jeff Dalrymple on behalf of Evangelical Council for Abuse Prevention. Welcome to Meet the Experts. ECAP is a Christian ministry dedicated to helping organizations keep kids safe, and we do that through our distinct biblical Christian worldview. We do it because these vulnerable persons are made in God's image. We do it because this is a part of our Great Commission calling. We come alongside of churches, Christian schools, other organizations that serve children and youth to help them keep kids safe so they can hear the gospel and grow in discipleship. Our guest today is Dr. Melodie Billell from Ontario, Canada. Melodie is a dear, dear friend to ECAP. She long ago served on our original standards creation committee, our expert panel that created what is now the ECAP Child Safety Standards. She's an expert at abuse prevention and risk management. She is the author of numerous books and journal articles. Her most recent book is the 2022 version of Plan to Protect, a Safeguarding Guide for Children, Youth, and Adults. She's a victim advocate. She's committed to giving a voice to victim survivors of abuse, and she stewards the disclosures and stories of abuse on behalf of clients. In 2022, Melodie received her doctorate at the University of Toronto. The focus of her thesis, which is very interesting, is on the nurturing and spiritual healing of victim survivors of abuse. She resides in Stouffville. Is that right, Melodie? Stouffville, Ontario, with her husband, Scott, who's also a pastor, and she has 3 grown children and 2 beautiful grandchildren. Dr. Melodie Billell, welcome to Meet the Experts.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Really good to be here. I love ECAP. Yeah.
Well, this is a new topic for us. Most of what we do is focused on child protection and abuse prevention. And we've been learning more about abuse to the special needs population. But I got to be honest and say that abuse for the elderly population is something I know the least about. And so I'm here to learn with the rest of you all. And I'm really, really excited about this conversation to be able to learn and to be able to put into practice some of these prevention measures. I am a firm believer that education and awareness on these topics is so critical. So Melodie, we're grateful to have you on and to learn from you. What we'll do is we'll spend the next 20 to 25 minutes learning from you, just talking about the subject of elder abuse, and then pointing us in the direction of prevention and some resources. I'm confident that Plan to Protect is a great place to dig deeper into this topic, and we'll share more resources from Plan to Protect in your website here a little bit later. Also, we'll do some Q&A a little bit later on in the program. So, Melodie, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Thank you for even tackling this topic on one of your podcasts. Your journey has been similar to mine in that when we first started Plan to Protect, we actually incorporated under the name Winning Kids, and we were focused on abuse prevention of children and young people. And over the course of the last 20 years, more and more people were asking us, well, what about elder abuse? What about vulnerable adult abuse? Abuse against individuals with disabilities? And we ended up changing our operating name to Plan to Protect because we really wanted to focus on protection of anyone that was vulnerable. And I find it so heartbreaking that at the beginning of someone's life, when they are a young child, they are so easily abused, and that people take advantage of children and abuse children. But also at the end of someone's life, they are also so vulnerable to abuse. Statistics tell us that 1 out of every 10 individuals in North America will be abused after they turn 60 years of age. 1 in 10 individuals. And I want to take you back to when I was in my early 20s. I actually moved from Grand Rapids, Michigan, up to Toronto to be near my grandparents. My grandparents lived in Toronto, and I moved up to Toronto to live near them. There were no other family members anywhere around. And during the few years that I was the primary caregiver for my grandparents, my grandmother was experiencing dementia. And she was just my favorite person. I just loved her. She's the one that taught me to pray. She had the faith of a mustard seed for everything that she tackled in her life. But she had the onset of dementia, and she had to be hospitalized into an institution, a long-term care institution. And I was in my early 20s at the time, and I would go to visit her, and she would beg me to take her out of there. She would tell me terrible things would happen at night to her. And I just always said to her, "Oh, Grandma, you're just imagining those things. No one's hurting you in the middle of the night. No one is coming into your room in the middle of the night." And I just chalked it up all to dementia. And I wish I knew then what I know today, because I would have been so much more observant and have asked tough questions about abuse. Tia Walker has a quote that says, "To care for those who once cared for us is one of the highest honors." And I am so grateful for ECAP and the work that you're doing on trying to prevent and child abuse and raise standards and recognize and draw people's attention to standards of child abuse. But I want to really encourage the audience to not just focus solely on child abuse, but on abuse of anyone that is vulnerable, because individuals are being harmed by people, whether that be physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, emotional abuse, spiritual abuse. Now, I know that we can easily get frustrated and irritated when people don't keep up to the same speed that we go in. I know that even myself, with my own children, as I age, they sometimes grow impatient with me if I don't, say the right words. They'll tell me something, might not be tolerant in this society, or I might be slower at onboarding. I tell you, Jeff, I am going to be a bit of a slow onboarder with ChatGPT. I'm struggling with that. But I find that even sometimes the response of young staff members or individuals in the church, or even my own family members, can sometimes be not as respectful and honoring, because they're impatient with me. And I think sometimes that is why individuals experience elder abuse. So when we focus on this topic of elder abuse, I want to encourage you, within your churches, within your Christian ministries, don't just have policies that are specifically for children, but think more holistically for protection against the vulnerable people within your churches and your ministries. And so many of those same standards that we established for ECAP are very, very similar to the same standards that you would for child abuse. There are some differences, and I'll speak to those in just a few minutes, but the types of abuse are very, very similar. Physical abuse, and that might be restraining an elderly person, hitting them, squeezing their arms, trying to silence them somehow, locking them in a room. Those would all be forms of physical abuse. Emotional abuse is not providing that dignity and respect for the elderly person. Now, when we talk about an elderly person, we're really talking about anyone that is over the age of 60, 65, though most elder abuse happens when someone is over the age of 85. And because of illnesses like dementia and Alzheimer's, they face so similar repercussions as a child under the age of 5, because they don't have a voice, they don't have the memory, and you add on to that, they love the person in many cases that is abusing them. It might be a family member, a spouse, a caregiver, someone that they depend on for transportation, for their livelihood, for food, for shelter, for being able to get around. They feel that they won't be believed, and they want to protect often the person that is abusing them. So when we talk about elder abuse, we're talking about physical abuse. We're talking about emotional abuse, where we really do not respect that individual's dignity and we don't honor them. We belittle them, criticize them, try to silence them. There's also many elderly people that are being abused sexually. And this is what haunts me at night when I think about my grandmother, who was in that long-term care facility. When she was in that long-term care facility, and she told me about people that would come into her room at night and harm her, I now lie awake at night sometimes and wonder, was she being sexually abused? And we only have to do a quick Google search to find that individuals that are caregivers in long-term care facilities are being sexually abused. But then we also face financial abuse, neglect, and spiritual abuse. So within our policies, within our child protection policies or our church protection policies, we should include those definitions of physical, sexual, emotional, neglect, spiritual, and financial abuse. Definitions so that our volunteers and our staff are well aware of those forms of abuse. We should also take into consideration where we do ministry with these individuals. So think about it for your church or your ministry. How often within our churches do we go to visit shut-ins? Do we go to visit individuals in long-term care homes or nursing homes? Do we go to visit those within their own home that are shut in and may want communion brought to them, or someone to even help with transportation or providing food and dropping off food to their doors, or even our young people's groups that go and do rake lawns or help with gardening or do a grocery run. And if you have ministries within your churches that are targeted to the elderly people, you should have abuse prevention protocols in place, similar to those standards that ECAP offers, but for the elderly. I heard a case study, and it was true. All the case studies I ever talk about here at Plan to Protect, they're real. They're real stories that I hear about almost every day, every week. I don't need to make up these stories because I hear about them, and they are really happening within churches and ministries across North America. I had a church call me, and it was the chairman of a board. And he said to me that they are very concerned that legal action has been brought against the church because their pastor had influenced an elderly person in the congregation to change her will and give the estate to the pastor and his wife. What had transpired is a young pastor and his wife had moved into a small community, became friends with individuals within the congregation, and he and his wife would go visit this shut-in. And this dear lady shared with the pastor and his wife that she didn't have a lot of family. She had some family, but she wanted to give the church all of her inheritance, all of her estate. A small amount was being given to the family, but the majority of her estate she wanted to give to the Lord. The pastor and his wife, over the course of the next 12 months, as they befriended her, they told this dear woman that they did not have life insurance, they did not have a very big pension plan, that they were living in the manse of the church, they didn't even own their own house, and that the church really did have an endowment program in place, that they already had quite a bit of money in a bank account, and really the church did not need her inheritance, but that if she gave the estate to them and directed the estate to them personally, that they would be able to dedicate their whole life and career to church ministry and service for the Lord. And they convinced this dear woman to change her estate. No one knew about this until she passed and the will was read, and the church was under the understanding that the estate was going to be given to the church. The family had been completely in agreement with the money being given to the church that the woman had grown up in and had served for many years, only to find out that when they were reading the will, that the woman had changed her will and had given this very, very large estate to the pastor and his wife. That's just one case study, one story that is true and real, that could have happened in any one of our churches. Now what was happening is the family was suing the church because they felt that there should have been more oversight to the pastor. They included the pastor and the wife in the lawsuit, but because this estate had changed, it got caught into probate and caused quite a bit of problems. And the chairman of the board said to me, Melodie, how could we have prevented this? That's why I think it's so important that our churches and our ministries have good protocols in place, accountability for all of our staff and volunteers. As much as we want to be trusting of our staff members, our pastoral staff, our volunteers, we must have protocols in place. I often think of standards as a playground, as a sandbox. And I use this example often. I have a grandson, he's just about 3 years of age, and they're missionaries in Kenya. And my daughter and son-in-law built a sandbox for my 3-year-old grandson. And they put quite high cement walls around the sandbox. They put all the sand in the sandbox. They put the toys in the sandbox. They even have a cover for the sandbox. I don't want to think about what they're trying to keep out of that sandbox. This grandma doesn't want to even consider the creepy crawly things that could get into that sandbox. But the idea of the sandbox was to establish parameters. And they tell my sweet little grandson, Malachi, you have to keep all the sand and the toys in the sandbox, and you can play within the sandbox. When I think of standards, I think of building a sandbox and saying our volunteers and staff within our churches and ministries can work within these parameters. And this is the way we are going to do ministry within our church. So if we go to visit an elderly person in a long-term care facility, if we're going to engage in conversations around finances, if we're going to take pictures, if we're going to do transportation, we should be doing and following these protocols in place, following the policies, the procedures, the protocols, the training, the screening. So the same screening requirements that you would have for those that work with children and youth, you would use those same screening protocols for those that are doing visitation and working with the elderly. Now, there are a few changes that would not apply for the elderly as with children. For example, in most of our states and in all of our provinces in Canada, there are laws in place around reporting abuse. So here at Plan to Protect, we talk about that you report child abuse, you respond to vulnerable adult abuse. That if you know of a child that is in need of protection, you follow the ethical and mandatory duty to report child abuse, and you call child welfare or child protection services. Most provinces don't have, and most states do not have those same laws in place around elder abuse. So you respond to elder abuse with care and understanding and coaching. Now, there are laws in many of our states and provinces that if the abuse happened within a long-term care facility, you have a legal duty to report that. But if the abuse happened within your church ministries against an elderly person, or when you're doing visitation in someone's home, your state may not have those same mandatory reporting guidelines for the elderly as they do for children. So what we would say in this situation is come alongside and ask the question, does this person have cognitive capacity to report abuse? Cognitive capacity means, does this person have the wherewithal mentally to be able to know that they can call law enforcement and report the abuse? If they are struggling with dementia or Alzheimer's, my mother-in-law today, she's about 5 minutes from my office. She's in a long-term care facility. She has Alzheimer's. She's 85 years of age. She does not know what she had for lunch today. She doesn't remember my name anymore. She doesn't remember my visit. She does not have cognitive capacity. So if I believe that she was in need of protection or knew that she was being abused, I should immediately report that to the police. But if the individual does have cognitive capacity, they can make decisions on their own, then you would be empowering them and encouraging them to seek help. So, and this is a situation where we would coach them, remind them that this is not behavior that they should be experiencing, that what is happening to them is not right, and help put together a care plan. So when they are ready, that they will call law enforcement and secure help. We always tell the elderly that they should not confront the abuser because that may put them in greater danger. And you as a church should not confront the abuser. Rather, work with the individual, work with the victim, provide them a care plan to be able to get the help they need when they're ready to get that help. But otherwise, many of the same protocols and standards you would put into place for child protection, you would also use for vulnerable adult protection. I think that's pretty much what I wanted to share with you today. I'm happy to take any questions that come in. This is a difficult topic because it's a little bit different than child protection, but it's very similar in many ways. But I really think that we should be considering how to protect the elderly as much as we do children. Insurance companies are now requiring those same protocols be put in place for all vulnerable people within your churches. I often hear about, well, what does the insurance company require? And I have a little bit of problem with that question, Jeff, because I don't think as a church we should be doing everything just because the insurance company tells us to be doing it. But I think we should be doing it because we want to really reflect the Father heart of God, and that he talks about taking care of the widow. He talks about the person who does not have a voice and the individual that's oppressed. And I think we should be striving for excellence within our churches and ministries. I think we should be the safest place in town. And we should be protecting these individuals. We shouldn't be waiting for the insurance company to mandate this or not mandate this. But I know the insurance companies that we work closely with here at Plan to Protect are requiring churches and ministries to also have those same policies and procedures in place for individuals with disabilities, vulnerable adults, and elderly individuals. So that's my word, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Melodie, this is incredibly helpful. First of all, just to recap the different types of abuse that you mentioned. You talked about, as we're related to the elderly population, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, neglect, economic or financial abuse, and even spiritual abuse. Is that right?
Yes.
Typically, this population, we're thinking 60 to 65 plus, but predominantly you're seeing abuse show up mostly in 85-year-old elderly persons and above, right?
Yes.
This is incredibly helpful. One of the questions that we're thinking about here is, oftentimes the elderly, I'm guessing, may not be abused in a Christian ministry context. Can you share with us any statistics or information, even anecdotally? What is the context that we see most of this abuse take place?
Yeah, most of this elder abuse is happening within their homes where they are living. So many elderly people now go to live with their daughter and their son-in-law, or their son and their daughter-in-law, or they may still be living with their spouse. So there might be domestic, intimate partner violence happening. But what I mostly hear about is family members that are abusing the elderly people. I was teaching an adult Sunday school class, and there was a woman in the front row of my adult Sunday school class, and I was actually teaching the book of Job, and this woman had a huge black eye. And after I was done teaching, I said, "I am so sorry, you've got a terrible black eye." I said, "Are you okay?" And she tried to say, "Oh yes, I don't know how it happened." And I said, "Are you suffering? Are you okay? Do you need any help?" And she got tears in her eyes, and she said, "Melodie, my son-in-law did this to me." And I asked her for clarification. I said, "Your son-in-law, don't you live with your son-in-law and your daughter?" She says, "My daughter went out the other day. She was gone for the day. My son-in-law was at home, and he gets so impatient with me, and he hit me in the face, and I ended up with a black eye." And I said, "Did you tell your daughter? Have you shared this with anyone?" And she said, "No, I think I deserved it." And I just wept when she said that, because she's such a dear lady. And I said to her, "You do not ever deserve to be hit in the face." And she says, "Well, he has a lot of pressure. He's got financial pressure, and he's got teenagers, and they've taken me in, and I know I'm not as quick as I used to be." And I said, "That does not mean that you deserve being hit." And it just broke my heart to think that she believes she deserved this. And so I think most of this abuse is happening within the home, but these are individuals that are coming to church and sitting in our pews. So I believe that if we suspect that abuse is happening, we should really provide both elder abuse awareness seminars for the elderly within our churches. This is something that we encourage churches to do, is do a lunch and learn, do a seniors event in your church, and provide this training on what elder abuse is and how to respond if it's happening to you or if it's happening to a friend or a loved one.
Melodie, that's surprising. you're giving this example of domestic abuse and just the complexities that come with the relationships involved in that type of environment. The black eye example seems fairly obvious of abuse taking place, but what are some other indicators or signs that maybe we can look for to recognize abuse in the elderly population?
I think if your seniors are absent for a long period of time, that could be an indicator. Many of the same indicators with child abuse mirror that of elder abuse. If you see elderly people that are trying to cover up bruises, if you see an elderly person and you go raise your hands in church, or you raise your hand and they flinch, that would be an indicator that they could be in need of protection. If their lifestyle and their the care that they have doesn't seem to match what their bank account should be reflecting. I think about a wonderful woman that I've known for years. She threw a wedding shower for me almost 40 years ago now. And Maria, she lovely woman. Her husband died. She initially went and moved in with her son and daughter-in-law and their children, and they ended up putting her in a low income nursing home. But it was known by many people that she had a large estate, but the care, the way she was dressing, the location where she was living did not mirror the state that we knew that she had. The same time, her family just purchased a very large house, bought new cars, seemed to be living much above their own means, but she was living much below her means. So even things like that could be happening, or where individuals are signing checks on behalf of the elderly person. That could be an indicator of financial abuse. If there's marks showing that they've been constrained or restrained in some way, that might be an indicator.
Yeah, thank you. So what should we do if maybe we suspect this kind of abuse is taking place, whether it's in the domestic environment that you're describing, a caregiver, maybe a care facility? You touched on this a little bit, but I just want to emphasize, you talked about reporting and responding as a little bit different for the elderly population versus children or minors. Could you emphasize that again? What should we do if we recognize some of these indicators as you've shared?
I think in your notes for your podcast, we can include some links for reporting elder abuse in North America. I know in the States, there are some 1-800 numbers that you can call for help if it involves elder abuse. If they're in a long-term care facility, certainly reach out and report if the individual's in a long-term care facility. If the person has cognitive capacity, I would try to come alongside that elderly person and ask questions, ask intentional questions about their bruising or how they are doing. What is their greatest fear? Don't ask leading questions. Don't put words in their mouth, but just ask questions that show that you are concerned. Invite them to a seminar or a workshop within your church on elder abuse and provide them resources for them to read so that they have a care plan in place if they recognize that they are being abused.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on the care facility? So what are some questions? Let's say maybe my parents are in a care facility. What kind of questions could I ask of that facility to determine what measures they have in place to protect the residents in that facility? Any other characteristics of that facility where these kind of prevention measures may be in place? Any guidance there?
That's a great question. In almost every care facility, you will see posters or signage on their walls on what the rights of the seniors and citizens are within that care home. So I actually, where my mother-in-law is, I took a picture of those rights. So I knew exactly what her rights are. And it specifically says right from protection of any kind of harm or abuse. It also has contact information if there's any concerns about abuse within that care facility. But I think, and this applies whether it's a child, Jeff, or a senior, I wish I knew then what I know now. And I often spend time coaching parents on questions to ask when they entrust their children to others. And those same questions I think we should be asking care facilities. How do you recruit your staff members? How do you screen them? What kind of screening do you use? And don't accept the answer, well, we do a criminal record check. That is not enough screening to do when it comes to entrusting a loved one into someone's care. I want to know that they have interviewed this individual, that they have checked references on this individual, places where they have worked in the past, people that have known them for a long period of time. And when I do a reference check, I ask the question, would you entrust your child? Would you entrust your grandmother into the care of this person? So I want to know what kind of screening steps they take for their staff and volunteers. I want to know what kind of supervision and oversight and ratios, the same kind of ratios that we would follow under child protection. I want to know that they also have ratios in place for how many patients they assign to a PSW or to nursing staff. I want to know what kind of supervision they have in place. I want to know what are their policies and definitions of abuse. And when there is a suspicion or an allegation or disclosure of abuse, how are they handling that disclosure or suspicion or allegation? So the same standards that we established for ECAP would be similar to the standards and the questions I would be asking in a long-term care facility.
Yeah, so very helpful. PSW, is that a public safety worker? Is that what you?
Public support worker, a personal support worker. We call them, we call them PSWs here. Personal support worker, it would be similar to like someone who comes into the home and helps someone with their, bathing or dressing or eating, helping with personal needs.
Good, that's helpful. One of the things from my vantage point is the elderly population oftentimes is just neglected. They're in a retirement home someplace, and it's kind of sadly, heartbreakingly so, out of sight, out of mind. I really would love to see Christians leading in this area, not forgetting that older generation, but really taking steps. Could you talk a little bit about that, and maybe even share some examples of what churches can do? Maybe it's shut-in ministry, maybe it's visitations. What are you seeing? And if you could just encourage Christians, that's our audience, right? Christian ministry leaders. What should churches do? What should Christians be doing to care and engage this population?
When I started with Plan to Protect, the Lord gave me a verse, and it's in Nehemiah 9:27. And it says, and they cried out in their affliction, and he heard them, and he sent them defenders to free them from their injustices. And I have held on to that verse for almost 20 years now, Jeff. And that is my calling. I believe that there are individuals, you only have to walk through the halls of a nursing home and hear elderly people cry out, help me, will someone please come and help me? And these are individuals that have been ignored or neglected and are alone. I can't think of a lonelier existence than having to be in a nursing home. My husband and I go to visit my mother-in-law regularly, and it's not because she needs it, because she doesn't even remember us anymore. But we go just so that we can observe and ensure her care and remind her that we love her. So I think that so much of our ministries within our churches, we tend to keep it within the walls of our church. But I would love to see churches adopt a senior center or nursing home within their community and just offer to come and be a blessing to the seniors, to visit them, to pray for them, to read to them, to offer a church service to them, to sing at Christmas time and do a carol sing for them, just to be a blessing to these individuals. And that will take a load off of the nursing staff, who often can grow tired and weary and impatient, but it also brings joy to the seniors. And I think this is a beautiful ministry for youth groups to do. I certainly think that would be a great outreach ministry for your young adults, college and careers, young families within your church to adopt a senior, and just befriend that senior. Don't forget, you'll still need to go through that same screening process and training process to ensure that they understand the parameters of that sandbox. But I think that would be a beautiful ministry. I also think having a prayer ministry for the seniors and engaging them in prayer. My father, when he passed away, was in his mid-80s. And he was a prayer warrior. He prayed all the time. He had long lists of people that he was praying for around the world. And I think if we can tap into that prayer ministry of seniors, that would be a blessing to our churches and also be a blessing to them.
That's radically biblical, that we would care for the least of these like that. It makes me think, it wasn't through a church context, but when I was in high school, I did some volunteer work in elderly centers, and I had some fascinating conversations with that generation, just the greatest generation, and a lot of them were World War II veterans. And so the inner history geek in me would come out and ask all sorts of questions about their life and their experience. But what a tremendous ministry our churches can have. And to see Christians, there's a tremendous evangelistic opportunity to reach folks who are sitting there watching TV and playing cards and whatever else they're doing, right? What a tremendous admonition you have for us as Christ followers. Well, this has been Meet the Experts with my very special guest, Dr. Melodie Billell. She is the CEO and founder of Plan to Protect. She started Plan to Protect 15 years ago with a desire to raise the bar on safeguarding the vulnerable sector. So we've been talking about elder abuse. What is it? How do we recognize it? What do we do about it as Bible-believing, gospel-loving Christians? Melodie, thank you so much. Would you, as we just land this plane, talk to us a little bit about what does Plan to Protect offer in the category of elder abuse? What kind of programs, training, and solutions do you have that maybe our audience could benefit from?
When I first started Plan to Protect, I had actually, at the time, I don't even know if you know this, Jeff, I was actually working with Child Evangelism Fellowship. I was executive director of Child Evangelism Fellowship in Ontario, ministry that's how I came to know Jesus as a child. And I served as a CEF summer missionary. My kids served as a CEF summer missionary. And at the time, I was working as executive director, CEF in Ontario. And my insurance company came to me and asked me, what are you doing to protect the children? And I had a background working as a legal assistant, working in human resources. And the insurance company told me that I didn't qualify for abuse coverage. And my board told me I had to put protocols in place. And so I started writing policies and procedures and developing training and screening. Now I'm going back 25 years now. As I talk. And it was overwhelming to think, well, if I have to do this every church, every ministry, everybody has to do this. Why recreate the wheel? And there are experts out there that do safeguarding. At the time, we couldn't find someone that we could mirror the good work that they did. So that's when we started Plan to Protect. And since then, we've had thousands of churches and ministries use our draft policies, procedure statements, use our online training, take our Train the Trainer course, take our Administrator Leader course, our Crisis Response and Management course. So we've wanted to be sort of that one-stop. Anything that relates to safeguarding, we provide those solutions and services, both for preventing abuse and also for responding to abuse.
Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been incredibly helpful. I'm looking at that passage, Nehemiah 9:27, and want to leave our audience with your website, plantoprotect.com. We'll make sure that's in the notes as well, plantoprotect.com. Priority is abuse prevention and vulnerable sector protection. You all have resources for elderly abuse, but also for children, child protection as well. And it's available in French and Spanish as well. There's resources there. So be sure to visit their website and learn more. Thank you, Melodie Billell. Any final comments or words that you'd like to leave us with as we wrap up?
I just want to leave you again with that great quote from Tia that says, "To care for those who once cared for us is one of the highest honors." And I think that the church should be the safest place. And I think that we should be doing this so that we can honor God, bring him glory and honor, and really help create that environment where people will come to know and love and follow Jesus Christ.
That's fantastic. What a great place to end with why we do all of these things. And I wrote down your quote here. We want our churches to be the safest place in town. So Lord, help us do that faithfully. Melodie, thank you so much for your friendship. Thanks for being an affiliate member to ECAP. Again, we're Evangelical Council for Abuse Prevention. I'm Jeff Dalrymple, the Executive Director, and we serve Christian ministries with abuse prevention and child protection. Thank you so much for joining us today on Meet the Experts.